I didn't even grow up thinking of myself as biracial. I had a white mom, but I was black, and like the white kids I was growing up around didn't think I was white, and the black kids I was growing up around were accustomed to having, you know, all manner of skin tones in the black community, and didn't think it was weird to have mixed kids in the black community. So it was pretty cut and dried for me, my racial identity. Didn't think about it very much until I realized that the mother of my children was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and I realized my mom is blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and it started to strike me that my kids might be blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and what would that actually mean? And I'm living in Paris, and I'm interacting with, you know, people who don't necessarily actually think about things in terms of the one-drop rule. That's actually living outside of America.
Talk about this.
Yeah,
It's a very American phenomenon.
it's a very American phenomenon, and I think in America you don't even like. It's just atmospheric, so you don't even question that the rest of the world
That's
doesn't
actually
necessarily
cultural
think that.
programming.
Yeah.
That's very specific to this country.
Yeah, and so French people would I would, you know, say something just like from my American point of view about how my kids would be black, and French people would be like, why? What? They'd have black ancestry, but like, why would they be black? Why wouldn't they also be? And what if they look mostly not black? And what does that mean? And so I wrote this op-ed in the New York Times a year before she was born, arguing that mixed race black people have a moral duty to identify as black. And, you know, I realized even as I was writing it, that I was really writing that op-ed for an audience of one. I was writing that for myself to convince myself, because I was already starting to sense that the kind of grip of the racial logic was losing its hold on me. I would be explaining to people in Paris, you know, the idea of the one-drop rule, and I would just hear myself echoing the kind of the logic of the plantation and of the slave owner, and I was making the case that actually was a kind of argument that whiteness is a category of purity, and that actually started to strike me as insane. And by the time that my daughter was born, and I held her in my arms, I didn't think to myself, here it is, I have a white daughter, and here it is, my daughter's a different race than me. I realized that the fiction of race no longer held a spell over me, and I couldn't see her in these categories I was taught to see myself in, and the whole thing just fell apart for me. And I realized that we live on the racial margins. Most people don't actually have such like mixedness in their families, but I began to suspect that like these categories don't say something very true about us, but they probably don't say something very true about anybody, really, if we think about it. And that was when I began to really realize that I can't send this kid into the world, you know, with the logic of the plantation insisting that she's black because a drop of black blood makes a person black. And I can't send her into the world saying that she's white. She has a complicated ancestry, as we all do. And she's both an individual, and her race is Homo sapiens. And that's the fact of it. She has a specific kind of ethnicity and cultural background, and she has, you know, her racial identity is human. And, you know, people laugh in your face if you say things like this. They think you're the most naive person they've ever heard in your life. But the more I thought about it, and as I was writing my book about this, Self-Portrait in Black and White, you know, it really struck me that, you know, race, as we think about it, as these kind of color categories, it's old, but it's not that old. It's half a millennia old. You know, it's a real Enlightenment phenomenon.
Right.
Anything that comes into being that's like an idea that humans create is also something that could also not be in circulation. We could change.
It's artifice, yeah.
Yeah, and so we do race because we all agree to do race. And so I just said to myself there and then that, you know, people might continue to do race until the sun burns out, but, you know, I won't be forced to be a participant in what my late great friend Stanley Crouch called the all-American skin game. I'm out. I'm retiring from that. I'm not using the language that I think reinscribes these disastrous ideas. I'm not participating in it, and I'm not raising my kids to believe in and invest in racial identity, even if they're not fully in control of how the world sees them. Because your racial identity is ultimately a negotiation. I'm aware of that. You define yourself, and then the world also interacts with you, and it also asserts its own definition of who you are. I can't just go out and say I'm Japanese, but I will push back and not allow myself to be. I won't have to participate in calling myself what the slave owner used to call my ancestors. I'm just out of that. And one of the things that really struck me living in France was that, and especially when I used to shave my head, and my physical characteristics looked in France to people like someone who was Arab or from North Africa.
Yeah.
And so I would also, often, identity is a negotiation. You define yourself, but it's also how society perceives you. But I would be perceived and even profiled and stopped and bothered in airports at the height of the war on terror because I was being racialized as an Arab.
As Arab.
But it doesn't make me
Wow.
Arab. And the fundamental insight I had of that is like, even if people always say, well, you're post-racial until a cop, profiles you. And it's like a cop profiling me and telling me that I'm an N-word or whatever doesn't make me that any more than a cop profiling me and telling me I'm Arab is, because these are just categories of seeing, and they're illusions of seeing, and they're guided by racial prejudice to begin with.
At the same time, you've also written very eloquently about what I think even your own terminology is about certain glories of Black culture, straight up. You wrote a great piece about P. Diddy right after his maybe conviction or after the verdict, right?
After the verdict, yeah.
I'll let you describe what it is, but a lot of it was that he embodied and displayed a certain kind of compelling hybrid of, I guess, traditional low rap culture, but there was like a business corporate sheen to it as well, right? And it's has a very distinctive racial element to it, particularly in the 90s. I just watched Netflix has a long series about the late 90s Dallas Cowboys.
I need to watch that.
It's excellent. I had no idea Michael Irvin was put on trial for cocaine, possession.
Mm-hmm.
And on like the second to last day of the trial, part of the way that he prepares is he goes into this Austin, Texas courthouse. It's 95 degrees and he's wearing a full mink coat and sunglasses, right? And it's like very definitively, powerfully, charismatically late 90s Black culture of the kind that you describe in that piece, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I can't articulate it. I'm not even sure if it exists, but it feels like it's there. Some sort of tension between, on one hand, wanting to celebrate that and be like, that's incredible, and was enormously influential over a lot of chubby white private school kids like me, right? Who worship that shit, right? You grow up in the 90s, who are like 3 of your top 5 humans in the world.
Michael Jordan.
Like, don't insult me. Kobe, Eddie Murphy, and Biggie, right? It's like 3. I mean, back then, it's like it's like no joke to say this is like your vision of human excellence, and you don't necessarily racialize it when you're 14, at least not consciously. There is that phenomena. At the same time, you have this kind of racial abolitionist angle, which says even that category of Black culture itself might just be a pure fiction, and there seems to be a tension there. There seems to be. I don't know.
Well, no, I just, I think that it's important to use language more precisely than we're accustomed to, and that the way that like racecraft gets propagated is through kind of the slippage between using like racial terms to talk about culture and things like that, and to talk about biology and things like that, and to slip back and to toggle between the two senses. So I really find myself, with a ton of affinity for and loyalty to like a community and a tradition, a way of shaking hands or a way of dressing, a way of making music, a way of laughing, that to me you can call Black. But it really, what it refers to is a specific community of people in a specific geography over a specific period of time. It's different here than it is in other parts of the world.